A single gunshot in a quiet Sarajevo street. So small, so quick, so easy to miss, yet it cracked open the 20th century like a fault line. And as Europe spent 2 decades patching itself together after the First World War, no one imagined that an even darker storm was already gathering on the horizon, one that would reshape continents, topple empires, and drag ordinary people into a cataclysm unlike anything the world had ever seen. The story of the Second World War doesn't begin with armies or tanks or speeches delivered to roaring crowds. It begins with fear. Fear of repeating the horrors of World War I, fear of economic collapse, fear leveraged by charismatic men promising rebirth while quietly preparing for devastation. In the ruins of post-war Germany, families scavenged for coal in the rubble of once proud cities. Parents carried wheelbarrows of worthless banknotes to buy a loaf of bread. A nation reeling from humiliation found itself searching for someone, anyone, who seemed to offer certainty. Adolf Hitler understood this yearning with chilling precision. He converted despair into devotion and anger into ideology. The Treaty of Versailles, with its harsh reparations and territorial amputations, became his weapon. And as Germany drifted deeper into the global depression, Hitler's message grew louder. Germany had been betrayed. Germany had been wronged. Germany would rise again. While Germany seethed, other powers watched with their own ambitions. Italy's Benito Mussolini revived the grandeur of ancient Rome in speeches that stirred national pride but masked economic desperation. Far to the east, Japan eyed the resource-rich territories of China and Southeast Asia, convinced that only an empire could ensure the nation's survival. The world order of the 1930s wasn't simply unstable. It was creaking under the ambitions of 3 authoritarian regimes, convinced that the future belonged to them. The first tremors of war shook Asia, not Europe. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, claiming security concerns, but driven by hunger for land and resources. The world protested, but no one stopped them. It was the first of many times the world would watch tyranny grow without intervening. By 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. Cities fell in rapid succession, but it was the fall of Nanjing that stunned humanity. Over 6 weeks, soldiers unleashed a reign of terror. Mass executions, looting, and atrocities so brutal they shocked even wartime observers. The nations of the world condemned the violence, but again, no army stepped in. The silence of global powers emboldened aggressors everywhere. Meanwhile, Hitler moved with calculated precision. He withdrew Germany from the League of Nations, rebuilt the military in violation of Versailles, and reoccupied the Rhineland in 1936. France hesitated. Britain advised caution. The world hoped negotiation would tame the rising dictator. But every diplomatic gesture was met with another bold step. Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, rolling his armies across the border to cheering crowds. Next came the Sudetenland, carved away from Czechoslovakia after a tense conference in Munich where European leaders, desperate to avoid another world war, agreed to Hitler's demands. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned home proclaiming peace for our time. But as Winston Churchill warned, Britain had chosen dishonor and would still get war. Hitler wasted no time proving him right. In March 1939, he swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia, territory he had promised he would not touch. For the first time, it became clear that appeasement would not satisfy him. It would only feed him. The breaking point came in the summer of 1939, when Hitler demanded the return of Danzig and free passage across Poland. This time, Britain and France vowed to fight if Poland was attacked. Hitler prepared anyway, and on August 23, 1939, he shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact with his greatest ideological enemy, the Soviet Union. The agreement secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, giving Hitler the green light to strike west without fear of Soviet resistance. Dawn on September 1st, 1939. German troops stormed into Poland. Stuka dive bombers screamed across the sky, unleashing a brutal new style of warfare, blitzkrieg, lightning war. Tanks thrust deep into the country, infantry followed swiftly, and the Polish army found itself overwhelmed in weeks. Britain and France declared war, honoring their promise, but no immediate rescue came. By October, Poland had been carved up between Germany and the Soviet Union. World War II had begun. The early months of the war were eerily quiet on the Western Front, a period the press mockingly called the phony war. But the silence shattered in April 1940 when Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, securing crucial ports and resources. A month later, the blitzkrieg thundered into Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. French defenses, built around the mighty Maginot Line, proved useless against German tanks sweeping through the Ardennes, a forest they believed impassable. Paris fell in 6 weeks. 6 weeks to topple one of Europe's great powers. Hitler posed triumphantly before the Eiffel Tower, a symbol of the new reality. But from the ashes of defeat, something unexpected rose: hope. On the beaches of Dunkirk, where British and French forces were trapped by advancing Germans, a desperate evacuation began. Military ships, yachts, fishing boats, even small pleasure craft crossed the English Channel in waves, plucking soldiers from the sand under heavy fire. More than 330,000 men escaped. Winston Churchill called it a miracle of deliverance, but warned that wars are not won by evacuations. Britain stood alone now, staring across the Channel at an enemy preparing for invasion. Hitler launched the next phase, an air assault intended to crush British industry, break civilian morale, and pave the way for Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of the British Isles. The Battle of Britain raged through the summer of 1940. Londoners watched aerial dogfights overhead, hearing the roar of engines and the whistle of bombs. Children slept in subway stations. Entire blocks were reduced to smoking craters. But radar technology, skilled pilots, and the sheer resilience of the British people turned the tide. Hitler's air force suffered heavy losses. Britain had survived. Frustrated, Hitler turned east. The Führer believed the Soviet Union would collapse like France. Swiftly and decisively, Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, was the largest military invasion in human history. Millions of troops crossed the border, sweeping through Belarus, Ukraine, and toward Moscow. Cities fell. Entire Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed. But the Soviet Union was vast, its winters brutal, its people unyielding. And the more German troops advanced, the more their supply lines stretched thin. Then, on December 7th, 1941, the war expanded in a way few could have anticipated. Japan, seeking to cripple American influence in the Pacific, attacked Pearl Harbor. In just 2 hours, battleships burned, aircraft lay in ruins, and more than 2,400 Americans were killed. The United States, once deeply divided about entering the war, erupted with determination. Germany declared war on America soon after, binding the major world powers into 2 opposing alliances and ensuring the war would become truly global. The Pacific theater became a battleground of islands, jungles, and oceans. Japan seized territory rapidly. Hong Kong, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore. Prisoners of war endured horrific conditions along the Burma Railway and the Bataan Death March. But the turning points came swiftly once the US mobilized. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 destroyed 4 Japanese carriers, shifting momentum irreversibly. From there, American forces island-hopped across the Pacific, moving ever closer to Japan. Back in Europe, the Soviet Union faced unimaginable suffering as German armies pushed towards Stalingrad. The city became the centerpiece of Hitler's ambition and Stalin's resolve. Fighting raged street by street, building by building. Winter descended, freezing soldiers where they stood. When the Red Army encircled the German Sixth Army, Hitler ordered them to hold their ground. Instead, they starved, froze, and eventually surrendered. Stalingrad broke the myth of German invincibility. Meanwhile, Allied forces pushed across North Africa, defeating the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel, at El Alamein. They invaded Italy in 1943, encountering fierce resistance, but toppling Mussolini's regime. The noose tightened around Nazi Germany as American and British forces prepared for the invasion of Western Europe. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion ever launched, crashed onto the beaches of Normandy. Allied soldiers fought through machine gun fire, artillery barrages, and obstacles designed to shred landing craft, but they secured the beaches. They broke through, and slowly, relentlessly, they pushed inland. Paris was liberated in August. Germany found itself trapped in a vice, squeezed from east and west. As the Allies advanced, they uncovered horrors that defied comprehension. Concentration camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Bergen-Belsen revealed the industrialized murder of millions: Jews, Roma, disabled individuals, political prisoners. The Holocaust exposed the darkest brutality of the Nazi regime. Soldiers, who prided themselves on emotional toughness, wept as they freed skeletal survivors. Desperate to reverse the tide, Hitler launched a final counteroffensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Snowstorms blinded Allied reconnaissance. German tanks tore through thin American lines, but the Allies held. The German offensive collapsed, draining what little strength remained. By April 1945, Soviet forces had encircled Berlin. Hitler retreated into his bunker. Bombs shook the ground above as Russian troops fought through the streets. On April 30th, Hitler took his own life. Within a week, Germany surrendered. Victory in Europe had arrived. Yet, the war was not over. Japan fought with fierce determination, refusing to surrender, even as the US closed in. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa were so bloody, they gave American leaders pause. If the cost of capturing small islands was so high, what would an invasion of mainland Japan require? The decision that followed remains one of the most controversial in human history. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another fell on Nagasaki. The destruction was beyond anything the world had ever seen. Cities vaporized in seconds. Survivors suffered burns and radiation sickness. Japan surrendered shortly after, marking the end of World War II. But the war didn't simply end, it reshaped everything. Europe lay in ruins. Old empires crumbled. Millions were displaced, searching for homes that no longer existed. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, locked in a cold war of ideology and influence. Nations created the United Nations, hoping desperately to prevent another global catastrophe. World War II was not just a conflict of borders and alliances. It was a collision of ideologies, ambitions, fears, and humanity's capacity for both extraordinary bravery and unspeakable cruelty. It was fought by soldiers who wrote letters they feared would never be read, by civilians who rebuilt their lives from ashes, by resistance fighters who refused to surrender their dignity, and by everyday people whose names history may never record, but whose sacrifices shaped the world we live in. In the end, the war taught us something profound. The most powerful weapon on Earth is not the bomb, or the tank, or the plane. It is the choices we make, choices that can lift nations, destroy them, or change the course of history with a single moment. And as long as the world remembers the lessons carved into those 6 years of fire, there remains hope that such a storm will never again darken our horizon.